thought he was landing in Dubai to be crowned the king of crude, but instead, he was caged in a glass lounge, humiliated, rejected, and silently erased from the very power circles he believed he could conquer Dubai, February 2026. And the scene unfolding behind the polished glass walls of the VIP terminal was not diplomacy, not prestige, not royal influence, it was collapse in real time. The man who once walked behind his mother's coffin before the eyes of the world, the prince who monetized pain, rebellion, and exile, had just been told in the coldest bureaucratic language imaginable that his presence was not conducive to the current diplomatic climate. 4 hours. 4 suffocating hours in a private detention suite while calls went unanswered, doors stayed closed, and the illusion of untouchable status evaporated under fluorescent airport lighting. This was never a casual Middle Eastern visit. This was a high-stakes gamble disguised as ambition. Behind the scenes, encrypted messages, offshore shell companies, and Mediterranean yacht meetings had been weaving together what he arrogantly branded the Amber Crude Initiative. He wasn't seeking charity. He wasn't asking for a ceremonial ribbon-cutting role. He believed he was about to secure a multi-billion-dollar foothold in a private oil processing venture tied to shadowy figures orbiting the Saudi energy sector. And he believed, truly believed, that royal blood was a universal passport, but blood without backing is just biography. While he was positioning himself as a self-made oil power broker in late 2025, maritime security logs quietly recorded his presence aboard an elite superyacht in the Mediterranean, where a figure known only as the architect fed him the fantasy he had been starving to hear, that he was not a spare, not a sidelined royal, but a visionary sovereign destined to dominate global energy. The pitch was intoxicating. Bypass bureaucracies, circumvent traditional Aramco channels, use your name, use your mystique, use your grievance. And he did that. Financial records later revealed that nearly 80% of his liquid assets were funneled into this mirage, inheritance money, streaming payouts, reserves once described as protection for his family's future. Around $25 million reportedly moved into escrow accounts controlled by Amber Crude shell entities. This wasn't cautious investing. This was all in gambling. He wasn't diversifying wealth, he was torching stability. And the most chilling element, the collateral wasn't just cash back in Montecito. Whispers began circulating that in his desperation to secure silence and freedom from interference, he had floated the unthinkable, leaving his children under royal supervision in exchange for non-interference in his Middle Eastern dealings. Whether framed as strategic compromise or emotional manipulation, the optics were catastrophic. A man who built a global brand on trauma and protection suddenly looked like a gambler pushing family chips onto the table that meanwhile, London wasn't asleep. At Sandringham, an emergency summit reportedly took place. The message from the king was mercilessly clear. No rescue, no support, no path back. And while one brother was pleading into encrypted phones in a Dubai lounge, the other was reinforcing state-to-state alliances in Riyadh, reportedly ensuring that private ventures conducted under royal titles would neither be sanctioned nor recognized. This was no sibling rivalry anymore. This was institutional containment that in the Gulf, loyalty is currency, stability is sacred, and reputational risk is fatal. Authorities had reviewed not just a visa application but a dossier. Years of public grievances, commercial deals, televised betrayals, financial volatility. To power structures that value discretion above drama, he wasn't an asset. He was a liability with a famous surname. If he could fracture ties with his own family for a Netflix contract, what would stop him from detonating a business alliance the moment profits dipped? So the biometric scanner flashed red. The visa flagged for administrative review. The motorcade never arrived. The promised ministry calls went unanswered. The architect vanished. And at 4:45 a.m., the verdict was delivered: return to your point of origin. That flight back across the Atlantic wasn't just geographic retreat. It was financial freefall that by early 2026, the Montecito mansion had reportedly been leveraged through secondary loans to sustain the oil gamble. Bridge financing from aggressive private equity firms replaced traditional banking relationships. Staff resignations surfaced amid unpaid wages and volatile phone confrontations. Even the children's trust funds allegedly became part of the operational scramble during late 2025 pressure spikes. The public image of a calm advocate disintegrated into reports of frantic extensions, ballooning interest rates, and lenders circling. And Hollywood? Silence Studios reportedly feared entanglement in potential debt claims. Invitations dried up. A list alliances cooled. In an industry obsessed with leverage and optics, proximity to financial contagion is toxic. He had once been marketed as rebellious royalty with global reach. Now he was described off the record as a PR crisis attached to unstable capital. In Outside Montecito, another shift was unfolding. While he was detained abroad, emergency crisis sessions were allegedly being held in Los Angeles, with directives focused on strategic decoupling. The unified brand narrative began fracturing. Leaks painted contrasting images, warnings ignored, risk dismissed, responsibility redirected. The two-headed dragon was shedding one head to survive that back in London, the message remained unflinching. Any financial support would be strictly for the welfare of the children, and only under specific conditions. No bailouts, no emergency loans. The Bank of Dad wasn't just closed, it was sealed that by late February 2026, offshore entities tied to the Amber Crude venture reportedly filed for liquidation. The dream of rivaling royal wealth through oil concessions dissolved into Chapter 7 filings and reputational frostbite. The Middle Eastern monarchies had delivered their answer without theatrics. Relevance is earned, not inherited. He had traded centuries of institutional gravity for a speculative refinery stake that never materialized. He had risked inheritance for escrow illusions. He had believed proximity to power was power itself, but the desert does not negotiate with entitlement. When his private jet sliced back across the Atlantic after that 4-hour humiliation in Dubai, he wasn't returning as a misunderstood visionary. He was returning as a man whose balance sheet was bleeding out midair. The rejection at the border wasn't the climax. It was merely the public exposure of a collapse that had already begun months earlier in silence, behind offshore accounts and encrypted calls. By February 2026, nearly 80% of his liquid net worth had reportedly been vaporized into the Amber Crude fantasy. Inheritance reserves, once described as the protective shield for his children, had been redirected into escrow accounts tied to shell companies that promised founder status in a Saudi oil venture that legally could never exist without state authorization. Around $25 million moved under the illusion of exclusivity, leverage, destiny. It wasn't investment strategy. It was ego financing. Back in Montecito, the $14 million estate that once symbolized independence had quietly transformed into a liability layered with secondary loans. Bridge financing reportedly came not from patient institutions, but from aggressive private equity channels accustomed to extracting blood from overextended borrowers. Staff whispers grew louder. Resignations, unpaid wages, late-night shouting matches that echoed past manicured hedges. The image of serenity collapsed into frantic calls for extensions as interest rates ballooned and repayment deadlines loomed. And perhaps the most explosive allegation of all surfaced in hushed conversations that in late 2025, trust funds originally earmarked for Archie and Lilibet's future security were allegedly diverted to sustain operational costs tied to yacht meetings and energy negotiations. The father who spoke of legacy now appeared to be dismantling it. That meanwhile, in Los Angeles boardrooms, another survival script was being drafted. While he was detained in Dubai, emergency strategy sessions were reportedly underway, focused on brand insulation and reputational quarantine. For years, they marketed themselves as a united force, two exiles rewriting destiny. But when the oil gamble metastasized into a $25 million crater, the calculus shifted. Leaks to media outlets began painting a portrait of warnings ignored and advice dismissed. The subtle repositioning was unmistakable. One partner framed as reckless dreamer, the other as cautious strategist. In Hollywood, survival is narrative control, and the narrative was being redrawn in real time. That the industry reaction was swift and clinical. Executives reportedly expressed concern that association with the Amber Crude debt structure could expose future productions to liens or legal entanglements. The enthusiasm that once greeted streaming deals cooled into silence. Invitations vanished. Proximity to instability is radioactive in an ecosystem built on image liquidity. A former prince who once guaranteed headlines now guaranteed risk. But the international ramifications cut deeper than celebrity optics. The Gulf Cooperation Council had reportedly reviewed not just his visa paperwork, but a comprehensive behavioral dossier. In regions where institutional loyalty is currency, years of public family grievances translated into one damning question: if he can fracture allegiance with his own bloodline, how stable is he as a business ally? The biometric scanner's red flash at Dubai International Airport wasn't random. It was the endpoint of quiet diplomatic coordination. And while he demanded officials call the ministry, the response was uniform silence. The architect who once toasted to his ascension reportedly severed contact to avoid diplomatic fallout. In the desert power hierarchy, unpredictability is exiled. London, however, delivered the coldest message of all. Reports indicated that financial severance from the monarchy was absolute. Any assistance would be strictly confined to the welfare of the children and contingent on conditions. No rescue operation, no emergency infusion to stabilize Montecito. The implicit reality was brutal. Independence means consequences. consequences. The Bank of Dad wasn't reopening for oil-stained ambition, then came the corporate death certificate. By late February 2026, the last of the offshore entities tied to Amber Crude reportedly filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. Millions evaporated, founder titles dissolved, the promised refinery stake proved phantom. What remained was debt exposure, reputational frostbite, and a mansion quietly rumored to be edging toward distressed sale status. The upkeep alone, estimated at over $700,000 annually, became an anchor dragging beneath shrinking liquidity. But beyond the numbers lies the most uncomfortable chapter. The children, invoked in negotiations, cited in pleas at the border, leveraged rhetorically as future beneficiaries of oil wealth, found themselves at the center of public scrutiny. Reports described a household operating in survival mode, rotating staff, parental distraction consumed by financial triage and brand repositioning. The contrast between public advocacy for generational healing and private instability sharpened into outrage. And hovering over all of it was the strategic posture from London. While one brother spiraled through speculative ventures, the other fortified state relationships abroad. The message transmitted quietly across diplomatic channels was unmistakable. Private ventures conducted under royal titles would not be sanctioned or recognized. Containment had succeeded. The monarchy insulated itself, quarantined reputational contagion, and reaffirmed institutional continuity. What makes this saga seismic isn't merely the failed oil deal. It's the psychological anatomy of overreach. The Mediterranean yacht meetings, the shell companies, the escrow transfers, each step fueled by a hunger to eclipse legacy rather than build within it. He didn't just want independence, he wanted dominance. He wanted to prove that departure was evolution, not exile. But global energy markets do not bend to wounded pride. Saudi hydrocarbon law vests ownership solely in the state. Legal memorandums reportedly warned of impossibility. Advisors allegedly dismissed as saboteurs. The rebellion matured into self-sabotage that now, as the Amber Crude entities lie in liquidation and Montecito faces fiscal strain, the image shift is complete. The prince who once weaponized narrative now confronts a narrative he cannot edit. He is not the oil disruptor, not the sovereign investor, not the underestimated spare ascending through private brilliance. He is the cautionary exhibit in a case study about entitlement colliding with sovereign law, about ego colliding with institutional gravity. The Dubai Lounge will remain the defining snapshot. A man pacing, phones unanswered, doors sealed, relevance suspended. 4 hours that erased a billion-dollar fantasy. 4 hours that crystallized a brutal truth without institutional backing. A title is a memory. And the desert, indifferent and absolute, has already moved on.